Hello everybody. Today I'm making a video on scalars and why they are bad, and I'm going to try and explain what makes them bad and competitive, why they might see use in ladder, and other things along that line. But first let's define what a scalar even is. A scalar is a monkey or bloon. There's one in the game, and we're not really going to discuss it today since it's not really that relevant to our conversation, but just know there is one bloon that can continually grow for an indefinite amount of time. It cannot have a finite limit on the amount of damage or health it can gain, and the cards on the right are not scalars, as there is either a hard cap on their limit or a gameplay element like delay that prevents them from going forever. In certain instances, pretty much any bloon can become a scalar because it can be stopped by stuff like Arbiter forever. However, that's a very extreme condition that is unrealistic to achieve, so I'm not really going to count that in the video. The three scalars in question that I'm talking about are Heart of Vengeance Druid, Wizard Monkey, and Spikapole. In the order of worst to best, Spikapole is probably the best, Druid is probably the worst, and Wizard is probably in the middle, just kind of being okay. But before I actually go into each of them individually, I want to discuss the general pros and cons of scalars as a whole, because although all three of these guys are separate cards, they all actually have similar pros and cons. But their one pro being that they deal very high damage late game if they are allowed to scale. This is the reason why you run any of them in the first place, and the biggest reason why scalars have such a chokehold on a lot of players on ladder. However, there are cons for actually trying to get this damage. First of all, they don't do very much damage. All of them start at fairly low damage per turns for their cost, at 15 for 3, and then 25 for both Wizard and Spikapole for 4, which are both very low amounts of damage. They all have bad burst damage, doing very low amount of burst in general for their cost ranges again. They are poor when drawn late, as cards that are only really useful in the early game when drawn that early. And lastly, they're all unreliable for scaling due to a variety of factors that we'll get into that are exclusive to each one scaling method. We're going to start off with the weakest one, which is probably Heart of Vengeance Druid. Heart of Vengeance Druid is a 2 ammo, 15 damage monkey with 2 reload. His pros is that he has 2 ammo, so he's better with burst damage when buffed compared to other scalars, and that he is 1 gold cheaper than the other scalars. This is probably his most obvious and striking strength over the other two, as both of them are 4 costs. However, you get a lot of downsides in exchange for these small upsides. He has extraordinarily low damage, lower than even Wizard and Spikapole could have. Wizard and Spikapole have 25 for 4, which certainly is bad, but definitely isn't as bad as 15 for 3, which is an insanely low damage number in general. The second thing is that he has an awful scaling method that absolutely is the worst out of all three. Having to leak Bloons to scale is such a huge downside that it's genuinely not worth running this guy in aggro because he'll just die before he scales up. Thirdly, he benefits less from ammo buffs compared to the other two. The other two monkeys actually get pretty good use out of ammo buffs like Striker's Passive, for example, or Zeely's Totem. But Heart of Vengeance Druid, not nearly as much as the other two. And lastly, if those three downsides weren't already crippling enough, he also is the worst draw late game due to having the least amount of damage per turn and due to being the worst in terms of burst damage other than Wizard, which, although doing 5 less damage, immediately scales up to 30 the next turn without having to leak a bloon. So generally, Heart of Vengeance Druid sucks at everything and just generally isn't useful for aggro purposes. If you use him against aggro, you're going to get bowled over, as aggro does not have to actually care about his scaling to just kill you instantly. Next up on the totem pole is Wizard Monkey. He's a 4 gold, 25 damage, 1 ammo, 1 reload monkey, with the pros of having by far the easiest scaling method out of the 3. Unlike the other two, which actively need you to do something to scale them, Wizard Monkey just gains 5 damage on turn start, so he can just sit there and it doesn't really matter what your opponent does. He'll scale either way and get up to extreme damage numbers if he's just sat there for long enough. Not to mention, he has double ammo synergy due to 1 ammo, 1 reload. This makes cards like Try This and Striker's Passive pretty effective on him, even though they are both bad on him for a reason I'll get to later. The cons of Wizard is that he takes a very long time to scale with no way to speed it up. With Heart of Vengeance Druid and Spikapole, you have possible ways of speeding them up by doing stuff like ammo, or you can play something like, I don't know, Red Bloon Apocalypse on Heart of Vengeance, or just let more Bloons leak on Vengeance. That speeds it up by a little bit, even if it still is poor. With Wizard, you have no such way of doing this. He is going to gain a maximum of 5 damage every turn, no matter what, and that is a pretty bad weakness of him. Probably the best scaler is Spikapole. He is a 50 damage, 1 ammo, 2 reload monkey that costs 4 gold, and he has the pros of doing better burst damage than other scalers, which immediately is a lot better. Doing 50 damage immediately is a lot better than doing 30 or 25. He has ammo synergy, which actually is really good because the ammo synergy in specific actually boosts the scaling method of Spike-a-Pult, because Spike-a-Pult's scaling method is on pop instead of being on leak or on turn start. And lastly, I know this kind of goes with the ammo synergy, but he works with Azili Totem very well. Azili's Totem of Power is a 6 I don't even know what it's called. Azili's Totem is a 5 Bloontonium ability that gives one of your monkeys 1 temporary ammo for reducing her health by 20. And this works well with Spike-a-Pult because it allows them to scale faster, and it allows them to basically just play that continuous damage over and over and over again without having to wait for it to reload. Now, the cons of Spike-a-Pult is that they are less flexible targeting without ammo buffs due to the 2 reload and 1 ammo, and that they require enemy Bloons to be popped to actually scale, meaning in some archetypes it can be pretty difficult, if not impossible, to scale the Spike-a-Pult up to a decent level. That generally covers a lot of the more important information that I want to give about all 3. Now I just kind of want to ramble about a lot of their issues. All 3 of them have a major issue, which is that they are heavily outclassed by other defensive options late game, or even mid game. Now, scalers you might think do a lot of damage because their entire point is to scale up to do a lot of damage, but do they actually do a lot of damage? No, not really. Wizard, for example, let's just take the basic Wizard, 4 gold, 25 damage, 1 ammo, 1 reload. That is really low for 4. And even if you want to scale it over time, it takes Wizard 5 turns to match Crossbow. And Crossbow is a same cost monkey that isn't very good. He just is 50 damage per turn, 100 burst, which is still not really useful. Scalers start off with their stats so low to the point that it makes it really hard to actually have an advantage over the enemy if they know what they're doing with it at any point in the game. And that's because scalers have a problem versus every single archetype. We're going to take the best scaler for each of these archetypes, or at least what I think is the best scaler. If you have a different opinion, that's fine. And we're going to try and see what it does in each matchup. There are 5 main archetypes: Aggro, which tries and kills you as quick as possible; Burn, which tries and chips you down and finishes you off with direct damage; Tempo, which plays a lot of high-value Bloons or stuff like Farm to try and gain gold leads and health leads on the board to overwhelm you; OTK, which tries and create combos that kill you in 1 turn; and Control, which tries and control the game for as long as possible to wear you out and either kill you with Storm Bloons or kill you with an improvised OTK combo, usually using something like Eerie Life Force as of current. Starting off with Aggro, we're probably going to take Heart of Vengeance Druid, because Heart of Vengeance Druid's entire point, as of current, is to deal with aggro. And although it sounds like, in theory, it could be good, it's not really. Now, 3 gold isn't a ton, but it is when it's combined with that extremely low amount of damage per turn and burst damage. You might assume that you might be able to chip Bloons down to low health to scale the Druid safely, but in reality, it's really dangerous to do this, especially when aggro is leaning away from Swarm now nowadays and going for more so stuff like Blooming or Yellows, just strong, heavy-hitting direct Bloons. It makes it really difficult to scale, and it makes it really easy to actually just not deal with Heart of Vengeance and have no consequence for it. Heart of Vengeance Druid, for reference, requires 6 Bloons to leak before it matches Sniper, which is a 3 gold card with 45 damage per turn and 90 burst damage, just instantly. And leaking that much will just often murder you. And other scalers do pretty bad too. This isn't just a Heart of Vengeance Druid thing. They have higher gold costs and start off very weak. Spike-a-Pult might be the best one into it, but it's still not very good. And Wizard, as we talked about, takes 5 turns to even get to a crossbow level, which means that he's pretty poor against aggro as well. Moving on to Burn, Burn's game plan of hitting you with direct damage makes a lot of the scalers pretty much useless in terms of their damage, which is really bad because in terms of the matchup, these guys are kind of just bricks in your hand. Scalers can't really deal with a lot of the stuff that these guys actually want to throw at you, so versus Burn, all 3 of the scalers are pretty useless. They can't really pop Life Drain or other Bloons like Yellow instantly, so effectively, they really don't do anything. And that's really bad for a monkey in a matchup like Burn, where you just want it to at least deal with Yellows or Strike Bloons. The best one is probably Spike-a-Bolt because it does the best burst damage, so you can prevent the most damage being done to you instantly, but it is still really bad in this matchup, and all three scalers are pretty pathetic going into burn. Tempo is an interesting matchup because Tempo is one that actually is kind of useful for scalers to deal with. Now, here's the problem. Tempo is either usually able to rush you before you can get scary high scaling on your monkeys, or if it doesn't, then usually it's going to play something huge like Golden Blimp, which has so much health that that raw damage is actually not going to be a big help in that matchup. The problem with this is that you need a lot of time to scale, so you're kind of weak to both of these archetypes of like sub-archetypes of Tempo at the exact same time. Prince of Darkness in particular and other healers really like how scalers don't do huge burst damage because it makes healing a lot more effective and generally useful. And high health Bloons make Spike-a-Bolt more difficult to scale. Leaking is lethal, so Heart of Vengeance Druid isn't an option. So Wizard is probably the best by default, even though he is not that great into the matchup. Slow scaling makes it really difficult to actually get a big health Wizard in time for those big Bloons to come out. And again, if the Bloons are too big, like Golden Blimp, they really just don't do that much. Lastly, I'm combining OTK and Control into one slide because they have the exact same issue. Scalers are useless against pretty much both of them. Both archetypes don't really care about attacking you with board presence, they focus a lot more on defense. And because of that, they really like to kill you with instant, unreactable damage OTK combos, which scalers are pretty useless against because they are not defenders and don't protect you from that in any way. They can be useful for fighting the storm, but generally they are unnecessary for this purpose when other towers do that better, and they actually make you a little bit more reliant on not drawing them early, as you might get actually chumped down by clever greens or early Bloons that these archetypes use to draw cards. The long amount of turns you wait makes Wizard typically the best in this matchup, but even then, Wizard's damage is kind of going to waste against these guys unless they happen to play some really specific hybrid deck. So OTK and Control are both kind of useless for scalers to fight in. A big weakness I've seen people point out is counter cards, and yep, it is a problem with scalers. Scalers are really weak to being removed, especially by this one, Return to Sender, which is a really, really bad card to be very weak to. But all these things you see on the screen right now can remove scalers or effectively make them useless, which is really bad when this is a monkey that you really can't get value out of immediately when it's played. With other monkeys like Super Monkey, for example, you will immediately get that 270 burst damage regardless of if your opponent removes it the next turn. But for scalers, you really start with nothing, which means that getting your monkey removed by one of these cards is actually a pretty devastating and terrible downside for these cards. A big issue with scalers that I've touched on a little bit, but not entirely, is just how you can just flat out ignore them. I know it sounds kind of weird to say because the entire point of scalers is that if your opponent doesn't deal with them, they do a lot of damage, but genuinely, you can ignore a lot of scalers. If you're playing aggressive strategies, if you see a scaler being played, the opponent just lost a lot of value. Their gold just got spent on a really weak monkey, so you can immediately attack them and get a gold lead on them and a stat lead, which is really poor for them. If you're playing defensively, ignore the scaler. You can either remove it later with something like Return to Sender, or if you're running something like OTK, then who cares? You don't even need to deal with the scaler. You can just wait until you get your win con and not really care all that much. I mean, you can remove it if you want, but generally these defenses aren't that strong in terms of harming your win condition in particular, so who really cares? And if you're playing a strategy that does both offense and defense, you usually have the freedom to flex to what's more appropriate at the moment, unless you get something like a low roll, which then the scaler might actually do something to you, which could be a problem. But that's more often than not really the case with scalers. I've talked a lot of bad things about scalers, so what do they even do? Do they even do anything? Well, yes, they do actually do a few things. One is that they bully players who play into them badly. Two is that they get absurd value versus Tempo if Tempo refuses to attack or deal with the scaler. And three is that they're non-super rare or ultra rare late game cards that people can actually use without having to break the token wallet. I do want to talk about why scalars are even on ladder, because there is actually pretty interesting reasons why scalars are even there. Here's the thing. They punish ladder players pretty hard. Ladder players are not immediately the best at recognizing how to deal with something in the most efficient way, and ladder players that let scalars scale becomes really strong. A lot of ladder players don't know how to do stuff like OTK, burn, or make proper tempo decks that don't just immediately die to great play, which means that scalars are more effective against these decks as they have more of a chance to scale and more targets to actually do stuff with. Number two is that they feel just good to play. I mean, this is for a lot of people, but you just get to see a monkey grow and dominate everything. And that's just fun to see. It's fun to see a Spikapult scale up to unreasonable amounts of damage, destroying blimps instantly or chunking off a huge amount of their health. And that, lastly, is just that they're budget friendly. They aren't super rare or ultra rare. Two of them are rares, which is kind of pushing it, but Wizard is an uncommon, which isn't actually the most common in terms of late game cards at that rarity. I made this list of cards of late game monkeys in terms of rarity. Super rare and below shows a lot of late game cards, and ultra rare and above shows an even higher amount of those. I'm not going to go over all these individually because that would take forever, but just know there are a lot of strong cards in the rare section for late game. The problem is, free-to-play players cannot afford all of these cards, and especially because some ultra-rare cards like Bloon Master Alchemist and Mob Dominator make up a pretty important, crucial role in terms of defending against a lot of cards. And this makes scalars kind of appealing as they're a one card late game card, pretty much. You don't need a different card to do other things for it. Wizard will just kind of be your late game card. You don't have to play multiple supers, or an even more tax with favored trade, or you'll need an elite defender with something else, or a ninja monkey that you also need Shinobi tactics with. You just need to use Wizard, and that makes these cards appealing to a lot of newer players, as it's an easy way to get a late game card that doesn't feel like you're trying to break the bank paying for them. Despite these benefits, though, especially for newer players, scalars really have no use competitively. They've all seen zero use in competitive play due to their very exploitable weaknesses and few benefits, and anyone who's tried to use them has swiftly gotten stomped. Despite this, you may see a pretty common card paired with scalars that actually sees use in competitive play. That being Try This. It's a card seen in competitive play. It adds significant boost to damage per turn, but on scalars, it tends to exacerbate their weaknesses. Although boosting scaling and synergizing well with Wizard and Spikapult, paying 7 gold for a monkey on par with Crossbow is really awful and a way to quickly lose the game, combined with the other weaknesses of Try This that usually can get around with other cards. The thing about scalars is that Try This just has a lot of better targets. Moab Eliminator is 19 gold, but completely destroys 2 entire blimps, which is very strong against tempo, and really deals with those golden blimps very well. For Cripple Moab, it's half the cost, basically. You get +2 delay on any blimp and 300 damage, which is a good amount of damage that can give you value out the gate, but if it stays around is even better value. For Bouncing Bullet, it's not a great card by itself, but it works well with Try This as an 11 gold combo that deals 360 damage, which is some of the highest in the game. It also does 180 damage per turn instead of 90. All these cards are just more useful to use Try This on than scalars. The scalars just exacerbate the weaknesses of Try This, and Try This actually is kind of a potential replacer for scalars. The massive damage per turn potential of Try This is going to be more consistent without scalars, without have the same weaknesses as Try This, but to a much more extreme degree. When you can get a scalar return to standard or a Try This monkey return to standard, you almost always want the second option because you can immediately get that value out of Try This on huge targets like Cripple, like Moab Elim. These targets which immediately give you huge value, and you can choose when to play them instead of being forced to play them early game and having them be useless late game. Due to this, Try This is never seen with any sort of scalar, and although it's also pretty damn weak to return to sender, Try This actually sees some use in competitive with the cards that I said. The TLDR is just that scalars are just too weak. They're not really useful in competitive, but in casual they can be pretty good. Their weaknesses are vast in comparison to the small upside of massive potential damage per turn, and for competitive decks are choices that actively hurt the deck. This video isn't really meant to be a hate or shitting on these cards, really. If you like them, that's great. It's not trying to get you to stop using them, because if you have fun with these cards, great. I'd love to see you use them more, and it's fun to do it. After all, this is a video game. This is just a kind of video to analyze these cards for people who want to get better or just understand Cardstorm competitive more, as these cards commonly get brought up when new players actually enter the competitive scene. Thank you for watching this video. Comment below if you like scalars or have any idea on how to balance them, or just want to suggest future video topics, because I have a lot of ideas on how to balance scalars and video topics and stuff, but I just want to hear people's feedback. This is a very small community, so if you want to, I would urge you to subscribe. And I love Cardstorm, love this game to death, and I want to make more content for it. So subscribe if you want to see that. Maybe you like the video. I don't know. It's up to you. Have a good day.